started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Portland Public Safety Action Coalition's monthly meeting, and thank you for joining us this morning. This month, we're dispensing with our usual business to hear from our San Diego neighbors to the south about ways that city is compassionately dealing with the homeless crisis and public safety issues. We typically like to do introductions around the table, but that's difficult under these circumstances. So I'll just say I am Stan Penkin, and I am the acting president of PSAC, our acronym. For those who may be new to PSAC, we are a registered Oregon nonprofit whose mission is to bring together residents, government, nonprofits, and local businesses in support of policies and programs to reduce crime and create a safe and welcoming Portland for all. We also seek to bring awareness and provide an educational platform for issues of the day relating to criminal reform and safety. I hope you had the chance to read the article by San Diego's Mayor, Kevin Faulconer, as some background on today's discussion. To expand on that conversation, we're pleased to welcome San Diego County Sheriff Bill Gore and San Diego Police Department Captain Scott Wahl, who will share their experience. After we hear from them, we will open up the floor for questions and comments. A few housekeeping rules. Since we're on Zoom, and I think many of us are familiar with it at this point, I will ask you to please stay muted until you have an opportunity to speak. You can raise your hand, or there is, under the participants button, you can do the raise hand, which I think would be the best way to get attention to your question or comment. When you do speak, I will ask that you please give us your name and tell us your affiliation. So with that said, gentlemen, Bill and Scott, please take the Zoom and let us hear what's going on in San Diego. And we really appreciate your being with us today. So take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Stan. Just for everybody else's benefit, Stan and I have had several conversations during the months, introduced by a mutual friend of ours, Ray Mathis, who I guess some of you on the Zoom also know. He and I worked in the FBI for a lot of years ago, back in the 70s up in Seattle, and we're still friends to this day. But I've been in law enforcement now over 50 years, and one thing I've learned early on, if you're going to be in a meeting like this, it helps to have the expert with you, and I've got the expert off to my left here, Captain Scott Wahl. Especially after I read the article, you want to talk about the article that the San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer put out back in October, talking about the community policing division, of which Scott is the head of that division. So I thought it'd be really meaningful to have him here to specifically talk about what they're doing, although it is a collaboration, if you will, in San Diego County. In my FBI capacity, I worked all over the United States and Northwest, East, Midwest, you name it. I've seemed like I've worked there. And one of the unique things I found about San Diego is that there is a level of cooperation and collaboration between all levels of law enforcement, not just the sheriff getting along with the police department, but the FBI, the California Highway Patrol, everybody looks at an issue and tries to regionalize that problem, regionalize crime problems, if you will, so that we're not duplicating efforts or reinventing the wheel. And I think this is probably another great example of that collaboration. I really don't know what the situation is up in Portland as far as your jails, but in San Diego County, the only jails in the county are run by the sheriff's department. We don't have city jails, so everybody that's going to be arrested on a local charge has to come to my jail. So we have a role to play, and I've been involved with talking with the mayor going back 9 years, about dealing with the homeless issue. I said, I don't mind using my jails if it's part of an overall systematic approach to addressing homelessness. I don't want to take somebody off the street, throw them in my jail. We get them sober after a few days just to release them back onto the street again. And I think that's been our philosophy moving forward. So there is a collaboration, somewhat set back a little bit, that collaboration by COVID and our need to lower the population in our jails. So some of the people we were able to take in the past from the San Diego Police Department primarily, which is I would say ground zero for our homeless issue up in this county. And we allowed the San Diego Police Department to book misdemeanors, which doesn't happen in a lot of counties around California. They're just too much overcrowding to actually let them book a misdemeanor. But we always had that relationship with the San Diego Police Department. I think they used it judiciously with us in a comprehensive approach to deal with homelessness. But as I drew my daily population in my jails from like 5,600 back in February down to today, we're at like 34 or 3,500. I just had to stop bringing in those misdemeanors. Now we're starting to come out of that phase, and hopefully we'll get back into that collaboration. But that's just kind of one example of how the county and the city have worked together to address homelessness. I have a homeless assistance resource team in the Sheriff's Department, and we service, just to give you a little background, I police for about, pardon me, about 1 million people in San Diego County. San Diego County is 3.2 million people. I police for about 1 million of those. San Diego Police Department polices for about 1.3 million. So their policing function is bigger than mine, but I also run all the jails, as I pointed out, and provide security in all the courtrooms. What our homeless outreach teams do, pardon me, is primarily focus on unincorporated San Diego County. That's about 500,000 people. I also police for 9 incorporated cities that contract with the Sheriff's Department for police services, and that's about another 500,000 people. But our efforts so far are focused in our unincorporated area, which I have exclusive jurisdiction over, and then we deal with our incorporated cities to the extent they want to fund police services deal with homelessness. But I think it's probably appropriate now to turn it over to Scott, who can kind of tell you and talk details about what Kevin Faulkner, the mayor, talked about in that article and their approach to homelessness in San Diego, and which is to me amazing. We're having some good results. I shouldn't be amazing, but I mean, it seems like such a daunting challenge all over the United States that our numbers are actually coming down, and that's in no small part due to the great efforts, I think, of the San Diego Police Department and hope this collaboration we have in the county. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scott Wahl, and I look forward to answering any of your questions you have down the road.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Mr. Sheriff. It's an honor for me to be here to speak with you, one, and definitely an honor to be here sitting next to the sheriff. It is quite humbling when you get a phone call from the San Diego County Sheriff asking to participate in something like this. He's a man I hold in high regard, so very honored to be here. I will say that I kind of stumbled into this position a couple years ago. In 2018, I was promoted to captain and congratulated with an assignment that never existed before. And I was tasked with setting up a division that dealt primarily with homeless-related matters, mental illness, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, and trying to figure out a way that we could build a systematic approach and have law enforcement be a positive or have a positive impact in that system. So we knew it had to be collaborative, and some of the relationships that I had developed with the Sheriff's Department, with our county Health and Human Services agency, it really helped me hit the ground running. Right now I have a division that's, and this began in March of 2018, so it's a little over 2 years now. But it's a division that's got close to 90 people assigned to it. And the reason for that is, as the sheriff explained, we've got close to 3 million people here in our county, and it's split pretty closely between the city and the county. Our homeless population, however, we have about half of the homeless population in the city of San Diego. So, and a lot of it is focused in our urban areas in downtown or our beach areas, and very problematic. It's usually sunny and 75, 360 days a year. We have 5 days where it gets a little chilly, but other than that, it's beautiful here all the time. So it's very comfortable here around the clock. Our division is comprised of two entities, basically. One is our outreach efforts. We've been doing outreach for over 20 years here. And the biggest reason we've been doing outreach is because there's been a gap or a void that law enforcement has been forced to fill. And what we do with our outreach efforts, we're trying to connect folks to the help that's available, but really we're trying to divert people from the criminal justice system into rehab, into mental health hospitals, and into shelters. And so we wanted to take what we currently have and expand that. We immediately added, thanks to the help with the county, mental health clinicians that ride out in the field with our homeless outreach team. We added public health nurses that are providing vaccines, they're providing health screenings right out in the field. We also have with us county social workers. Those social workers are the folks, the professionals that have the Rolodex of supportive services that are available. And I think that is a critical component to anybody's plan on addressing homelessness. You have to have a collaborative team that ride together in not a car, but in a van. And let me preface all of this. All of this plan is pre-COVID. COVID has caused us to rethink and retool how we do things here. But the basic plan was to have these groups ride together in vans, 3, 4, 5 people deep. And when they get out and they speak with homeless folks in their environment, they're able to problem solve with any of the objections or challenges that they're faced with here in the county. So it's really been a very collaborative effort. Those same county workers also work with the other homeless outreach teams from our other cities in the county, as well as our sheriff's department. So as the homeless population moves from a different part of our county, they're able to cross over very easily and provide the supportive resources throughout the entire county. Two things that are important. Our main strategy is to provide compassion and balance that with accountability. And oftentimes what we see and we hear is there's a confusion about what compassion really means. And for law enforcement, by enforcing the law, it does not mean that we don't care. It does not mean that we are not compassionate. For some folks, not for everybody, but for some folks, hitting rock bottom is when you've landed in jail. And what we want to do is have a diversion program or process that gives you every opportunity to get out of the criminal justice system and get into the supportive rehabilitative services that are available. So when it comes to drug addiction or alcohol addiction, we have detox centers that allow you to go sober up. You're hit with intensive amounts of, I'd like to call it solicitation for help and supportive services. And the folks that are talking to you all have come through the program. All of them have been rehabilitated themselves so they can walk the walk, they can talk the talk. And by doing that, we're giving folks really the path straight to rehab versus going back to the streets. Sometimes it takes folks a few times, and that's okay. The message that we want to send here in San Diego County is that we're going to be relentless at sending you back to detox. Detox does not give you a criminal record, but it is, in a way, a timeout from being on the streets and using drugs or drinking alcohol all day long, disrupting the quality of life for everybody. And by doing that, we disrupt that environment, and it is a way for us to argue that it is compassionate to do what we're doing. If you take law enforcement out of that equation, you're just pushing rock bottom further. So those are some of the things that we've kind of done here in the city and in the county.
Can I just add,
Sure.
while you're on the topic of compassion, because I remember this this really struck a chord with me. I remember it was one of the mayor's State of the City message when he says, is it more compassionate to let these people just gradually kill themselves on the streets of our city through drug use, mental health issues, or is it more compassionate to maybe start them off in a jail environment, sadly, and get them the service they need to change their lives? To me, I find that much more compassionate than letting them just gradually kill themselves on the streets of our city.
Yes, good point. And you know, in addition to the supportive services that we have here, you have to have, if you want law enforcement to have a positive impact, you have to have a place for people to go. And here we have the bridge shelters. They're not a great environment. I'm not gonna lie to you about that. It's a congregate setting, and they're run by different service providers here. Some of them are religious based, some of them are non-faith based, but they provide a program that offers a path towards sustainable housing. They're cleaner, they're healthier, they're safer than being out on our streets. So you have to have a place for people to go. Here we've got shelter space for close to 1,200, 1,500 folks, at least in the city side. And I know the county, through some of the other neighboring cities, are providing different types of shelters.
What we're using is motels. We don't have the big shelters in the county, but we've got about 12 motels, hotels that have partnered with the county to we can provide vouchers to get them off the street into that kind of setting, and then bring the services to them in a motel, at least off the street.
And whatever that format looks like for your region, it's important that law enforcement has a place for people to go. We follow a progressive model here. It begins with a warning the first time that you're come into contact with law enforcement, an offer for a shelter bed, whether it's in a hotel, whether it's in some other type of facility, or in a sprung shelter like we have here in the city. If you decline that help, you get a warning the first time. The second time, it would increase to an infraction citation. Again, if you decline the shelter bed. The third time, it could escalate to a misdemeanor citation. The fourth time that we interact with you could lead to custodial arrest. Each and every time you're offered the shelter bed, each and every time, if you take the help that's available, you're diverted into a program that if you stay in the shelter, you stay there for 30 days, allow the case managers that are there, the counselors, the social workers, allow them a chance to try and help you, then your case is never issued. And the significance with that is we had close to 80% of our folks that went through this diversion program make it through the 30 days. Some of them moved on to bigger and better places. Some of them ended up back out on the streets. But the way that we looked at that was, that's shame on us as a region for not being able to find adequate housing or supportive services beyond that 30 days. It doesn't mean that we don't stop trying. We keep working with that person, but their case is never issued. It's like it never even happened. It doesn't even show up in our system. So that's it in a nutshell. What we've been able to do here in the county, we've had 2 years in a row. I know the article talks about a 6% reduction in 2019. We followed it with another 6% reduction in 2020. The city has a 12% reduction in unsheltered, in large part with expanding our shelters, but also with really in San Diego County, we've been able to say collectively across the county, and we always say it takes a village to address your homeless population. And that means it's going to take partnership with everybody, being on the same page. But as the sheriff said a minute ago, we don't allow folks to wither away on our streets. We're going to do something about it. You weren't aware, in 2017, we had the hepatitis A outbreak in the city. And that was in large part because of the tent cities that we allowed, the very unsanitary conditions that existed. So when we come through now, we don't allow those tent cities. We don't allow really the structures to grow and grow and grow. We come through and we sanitize every single day, 7 days a week. We de-litter every single day, 7 days a week throughout the day. And we have an intensive amount of outreach that is done. And if it's not accepted, then we do follow it with enforcement. So that's the game plan.
Another challenge that, and I'm sure it's the same in Oregon like it is in Washington and California, is really the lack of mental health beds in our community. And I'm probably not different than most of the jailers in the state of California. I'm the largest provider of mental health beds. When I had a population running 5,500 to 6,000, any given time, a third of my inmates are on some type of psychotropic drug. What we're trying to establish here in San Diego County is, for the lack of a better term, I think we call it psychiatric urgent care facilities, to where a family dealing with a loved one in crisis and mental health crisis has a place to take their loved one to get them the mental health care they need. A place for law enforcement officers to take somebody that's dealing with a behavioral health crisis, some place to take it if they haven't broken a law or a very minor infraction, some place to take them other than my jail to get them the mental health services they need. We're planning one right in the heart of San Diego between two major hospitals, but we're talking a year down the road, year and a half, 2 years down the road. We looked at one in the North County of San Diego. We started that negotiation back in March, April of last year. And now we're fighting the NIMBYs of San Diego County. Well, yeah, everybody wants these. These are great. Everybody's for it, but don't put it in my backyard. Put it in the city next to me, or put it, in the city down the road, because the concern is when these people are released, these mental health patients, they're going to be on our streets and then they're going to add to our problems. So it's not unique to San Diego. I'm sure it's something that every county deals with, is that we have to look at this. We're all in this together, and they've got to be, these facilities, these mental health facilities, these homeless shelters have to be sited someplace. And until we get over this NIMBYism, it's really exacerbating the problem. So we've got a good start here in San Diego. We've got a long way to go in that area. And like I say, I'm sure it's the same up in Portland. So
I saw one question pop up on the screen about our total homeless population. I know in the city, there's about 2,400 unsheltered. And then I believe it's about another 2,500 sheltered. So about 5,000 in the city. I'm waiting for confirmation on the numbers, Sheriff, unless you know it, but I think the county has about 3,000 to 4,000.
that's what we're dealing with,
Yeah.
roughly. One thing I think it'll probably come up, and I talk about all the time because of the civil unrest that we're all facing after the death of George Floyd, is the shift to social service. You can see what the San Diego Police Department's doing, same thing we're doing with our homeless assistance resource teams, where we take the mental health clinicians, we take the social service providers and take them into these, in our case, a lot of them are riverbed encampments or abandoned strip malls, to where the homeless will get a foothold, and we'll take these social service teams into these areas, but they will not go without law enforcement. There's a big push here in San Diego to set up these teams to handle these mental health calls. The number they used, we had 54,000 mental health calls in San Diego County last year. Well, these 54,000 calls weren't from some poor guy having a mental episode sitting in a bus stop. Usually there's somebody acting out as a threat to themselves or somebody else, and that's when law enforcement gets called. Although I applaud the efforts of people to get the social service, to get the psychiatrist, so you don't, put law enforcement in that position that we're not trained for. But trust me, these social service groups will not go into a lot of these environments without law enforcement presence to control the situation. Not to go in and shoot somebody, beat them up, throw them in jail, but just to control the situation, so these well-intentioned and very highly trained mental health clinicians can do their job. But don't fall for this thing that, we're going to put law enforcement out of this area, because it's just not going to happen. I think you have to have a measured approach, a collaborative approach with law enforcement and the social services working together. and let's open it up for questions.
Hey, Steve, I think you can see everybody, so can you kind of monitor the questions?
Yes,
Thank you. So,
do that.
go.
Let's see. So what I would like to do is if you would like to have a question for the sheriff or the captain, would you please raise your hand and I will unmute you. And I don't see any raised hands at the moment.
Let's see, where's this raised?
Oh, Jack. There we go.
Okay,
Are you okay?
as normal. Yeah, I couldn't figure out which is the raised hand one.
Just I would just say lift your hands, like raise your hand that way.
Oh, okay, just
Yeah.
okay. I have the reactions where that comes up. So
Yeah.
anyway, the first one I had was you mentioned about the pushback about NIMBYs and that. I'm sure I know it's not a slight that we are going to have pushbacks if we do this. The pushbacks also comes from the other side of it is that there's a lot of social service groups that did not. We had a very nice facility out in North Portland. The Bouchon building was their old jail, and there was a lot of pushback to move some of the homeless, the unsheltered, out to the Bouchon building, which is quite a ways out. But the pushback not only comes from the neighborhoods, it also comes from the homeless service groups. How did you combat that? Is there a possible way that you could combat it? Sure.
Go ahead.
So a couple things. One, when we set up any of the shelters or facilities, our mayor wants to make sure that that surrounding community is actually better than before the shelter was put in or the facility was put in. So part of what my division does is we staff around the clock, police officers, outreach officers as well, to be in those areas to make sure that we're addressing the quality of life issues and we're getting folks into the help that's available, but not allowing the areas to continue to have the structures, the tents, the drug and alcohol use. We don't allow that in those areas. And so what ends up happening is, to some degree, it does displace some of the issues, but it gets those areas cleaned up so that they are, at least the surrounding community and businesses don't feel a negative impact from those facilities. So that is one thing that we do. The other part with the service providers and social service providers, we've been doing our outreach here in San Diego County for close to 20 years. So the relationships that are there, the partnerships that are already there, quite frankly, they're from their perspective, they look around and they say, well, we're happy that everybody else is now finally getting on board with what we've already been doing for 20 years. I know in the city, we have once a week, we do a coordinated outreach event where we bring all of the service providers together. One of the things that is important to understand with service providers, and I'm sure it's the same up in your region, they are paid or funded to provide help and resources to a specific type of client. Let's say veterans villages, for example. If you're not a veteran, they're not going to be able to provide help to you. That's not what they're paid to help. Let's say it's a facility that helps treat drug addiction, but not mental illness. Well, if you've got mental illness and a drug addiction, you may not be able to get services there. And so there's a variety of different needs that they are funded to provide support in. The problem with that is if you leave them to go out on their own, they're looking for the right type of peg to fit the right type of hole that they provide. So we bring everybody together, we mix all of our teams up so that we have somebody that can answer to your unique needs. Sometimes it takes us using multiple service providers to find the right fit, but that's the beauty of bringing everybody together. What we've been advocating for is having a coordinated outreach person for the region that can help with that strategy and get it away from being law enforcement's role. I continue to tell folks that we will fill the gaps as we always do in anything in society when there's a void, but But ideally, it should be somebody that's a non-police officer that's coordinating that for the region. And we're doing that with our regional task force on homelessness now. But historically, we have not.
To one way we looked at addressing the NIMBYs, I can think of the one, the city in North County, Vista is the name of the town, and we wanted to locate one of these psychiatric urgent cares in their facility. And then that argument of, well, when they're fine, they're treated, they're on a 72-hour hold, but then they're released, and then they're in our communities. And the supervisor for that particular part of the county committed to even provide resources if the families weren't going to pick them up and take them home, provide resources for transportation resources to get that person back to their home. And some of them might be from Vista, so they are home, but other adjoining cities, the county agreed to pay transportation. We haven't successfully negotiated that yet, but it's a work in progress. I'm confident hopefully we'll still get there, but that's where you have to just keep adding resources to convince that city it won't be a hardship on that particular community. As Scott points out, it takes a law enforcement commitment. I'm sure you got a lot of resources dedicated to keeping those communities around these shelters safe, just so you don't have that community backlash.
I will say I have funding of about $8 million this year alone to pay for overtime. Not my regular staffing, just overtime alone is about $8 million to provide services, supportive services around all of the different facilities throughout the city. So it is expensive.
All right, thank you so much. That's awesome. We're gonna go to Luke, and then following Luke, Carol Benson. So Luke, I'm gonna unmute you, and unmute there. Let's see here. Let's see. How can I?
Here we go.
Okay, go ahead.
There we go. So, Sheriff Grove and Captain Wahl, thank you very much for doing this with us. So I used to be part of the PSAC group and got involved in Neighborhood Watch for a number of years, and it became so hopeless up here. We live in the downtown area, and so where Portland is at is not where San Diego is at all. There's no cooperation, or there's very little cooperation. I think the law enforcement wants to, but the city and the county commissioners are not working. They're working conjunction with themselves. It's very anti-police, and it's very anti-jail. So similar to San Diego County, all of the jail facilities for the Portland metro area is done by home. So not exactly like what you are, Sheriff Grove.
You broke up. Who runs the jails in Portland? You broke up when you were explaining that.
All of the jails in Portland are run by the county, Multnomah County. So it's exactly like San Diego. And the problem is the jails have been shrinking radically. In the last 10 years, they've halved the jails and the jail space. And I understand why, because 10 years ago, they looked at the data, and it was an awful lot of people who were in jail that were just on marijuana charges. So we've gone, I don't remember exactly these numbers, and I see a lot of the people who are attending probably have some of it. Alan, you probably have some good sense on these numbers, but from what I remember, we had something which was way too large, something close to 4,000, maybe 3,500 beds, and then we shrunk it by half. So we're below 2,000 right now. And the jail system about a year and a half ago here in Multnomah County started, we have an incredible sheriff, Sheriff Mike Reese. And he started putting in some common sense into the Multnomah County jail system and started rating prisoners. And it was because we had jail overcrowding. So you're probably very familiar with that in San Diego. But about a year and a half ago, we started kicking into what his system was called Yellow State Alert, where it was imminent release. So the police were notified really quickly. The courts were notified immediately that we're in imminent release. Just be careful. If you're putting anybody, if you're arresting anybody, be aware that we probably are going to have to let somebody out. And so about a year and a half ago, that started happening pretty regularly, once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week. They have also a thing that's called Red State Alert, and we are now in perpetual Red State Alert. Our jail system is in complete overcrowding. And I'm a little rusty on this. I've been out of the loop for probably about a year. In the last year, I finally just got fed up with what was going on in the city and the lack of care for the homeless. And so I have been working with our church on the other end and working with the homeless that are non-criminal. But the thing that was so frustrating is the prison system, and this is pre-COVID, the prison system had been operating almost for a solid year in Red State Alert. In other words, every time somebody was arrested, somebody else was let go. They were always let go in downtown at the Multnomah courthouse facility. And the crime in that area just exploded. The livability crimes, the violence, the car break-ins, the house break-ins, the business break-ins. We're at a point at least a year ago when I was more aware of this, that you could in Portland, and I think it is the same today, as a criminal, you can break into a business, you can rob somebody's home, you can steal a car, you can assault somebody who you don't know, you can do all kinds of stuff. And if you're caught, the court system up here has 4 hours to deal with you. That's the requirement by the state constitution. And there has been absolutely a revolving door. So we have, the Oregonian did a report, this is about 1.5 years ago. They discovered that 400 repeat offenders in Portland, homeless, were responsible for almost all of the arrests. So the numbers that we have for Portland, so you gave your numbers for the number of homeless. The last time I heard, which was about 1.5 years ago, we did a winter count in the Multnomah County area, and we had about 4,300 homeless in the worst of the winter. And so what I've heard is that, so we're a little bit smaller than where you're at, but again, that's at the worst of the winter. And most of the experts say that you have to multiply that by 2 to 3 to get a real sense of the number. So we have about 10,000 homeless wandering in the Multnomah County. And of those, when the Oregonian did the report, it appears that we have about 200 to 300 that are really nefarious repeat offenders, many of these with over 200 arrests, well known by the county police and by the city police. And what has happened is, right now, if somebody breaks into a business and gets caught, and that doesn't happen a whole lot, they're arraigned, and within less than 4 hours, and on the average, it's 2 hours, they're released. And that's Portland. So I just wanted to share that.
So, all right, we're going to go to Carol next. So Carol, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Hello, and thank you for the presentation. I'm a resident of the Old Town District in Portland, which sees the bulk of, by some people believe, has the bulk of the homeless issues in the city. And I was very struck by the mayor's article that he published in October, and particularly the statement that San Diego no longer accepts a sidewalk, a riverbed, or a tarp to be used as a home. And it seems to me that we've sort of lost control of that in Portland. And there are many, many, many people who are regarding that as their home. So my question to the San Diego team is, was that a single directive of the mayor, or was it something developed? That particular statement, was that a consensus from the city council or whatever the governing group is?
Well, yes and no. Thank you for that question. When we came out of 2017 with our hepatitis A outbreak in the city, close to 20 people died on our streets from hepatitis A. The mayor knew that he had to make some very tough decisions and have some significant change so that we could, one, prevent something like that from ever happening again, but two, really beginning to tackle and address the core problems and issues that were contributing to it in the first place. And so his stance from that point really began with no longer accepting those areas as a place for somebody to live. And we want something better, quite frankly. And so that's where it started.
And it was a wake up for the county also, since we're in charge of the healthcare, basically the main provider. And I think it forced a closer collaboration between the city and the county on homeless issues.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go ahead and go to Dr. Bob Davis. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Bob.
Okay, I'm Bob Davis. I read that San Diego has an active mental health court. Who determines if a person needs judicial intervention? And who provides the expert testimony on behalf of those being considered for commitment to care?
Well, I should have had the district attorney here also for this meeting. The mental health court, and it's interesting, the state laws have just changed here again here recently, and there's going to be more mental health diversion even before you get to the mental health court. That's a work in progress as we speak. My understanding is the mental health court works a lot like the drug courts do, where you're brought in and charged with an offense, but then you're diverted to get the mental health care, the behavioral health care you need. And if you successfully complete that, then those charges can be dropped, dismissed, expunged, whatever the case may be. And the new plan moving forward is there's a diversion program where you never even get to the courts, which caused some consternation on some people's part. I don't know how it's going to work out, to be quite honest with you. As far as who makes the evaluation of the individual, I don't know the specifics of that, of the mental health condition of the person in that court. I would guess it's got to be some county facility. I don't know.
Well, I know the county does contract with mental health systems.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're a mental health provider here. And I know they do, they're in our shelters as well, providing that mental health support. So I'm confident that the direction that we're going here is in addition to what the sheriff is saying, is changing the laws with conservatorship as well, that give families a little bit more control over what happens with folks that are suffering from the severe mental illness that we see here on our streets. So I know it's not totally answering your question, but
Scott hit on something that I think I've mentioned in every one of my Rotary speeches for the last 10 years. It takes next to an act of Congress to get somebody involuntarily committed. And I don't think it's just in California. I think it's probably that way throughout the country. And to me, that is inhumane. These people need help. And the way the laws are written now, you have to wait until that person, you can show they're a threat to themselves or somebody else, they act out and commit some criminal act, and then we can do something. To me, and I live in a part of San Diego not far from downtown, where when I'm walking my dog, I pass people that they need help, and I know it, but they're not a threat to me when I walk by them, but they don't have a full deck. They could need some mental health help and counseling and meds. And yet, unless they voluntarily submit to that type of help, they're not going to get it. And to me, I think that's one of the biggest changes that this country could make nationwide, state by state, federal level, whatever. Look at those conservatorship laws. One flew over the cuckoo nest syndrome, right? Where we started closing state hospitals, and because we saw the inhumane treatment in some of them, which I think the pendulum has swung too far, and it's not right. It's not getting the people the help they need, and to me it's very inhumane.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sheriff. Okay, Melanie, it's your turn. So unmute yourself. Okay, you're still muted.
Got it.
Okay.
I got it. I muted myself. First of all, thank you very much for coming. And be very careful when you say anything bad about Ken Kesey, because he's one of our most favorite sons from Oregon. So I want to make, I have one comment and one question. My comment is this, as Secretary of PSAC, and that is that I would request people who are using the chat function to know that when you chat while someone else is speaking, an invited guest, it's a lot like talking in a movie theater. I think everyone here wants to focus on the guest, and I hope that you would be courteous about that. The question I have for you, gentlemen, is you have rightfully said, as caveat several times, this is pre-COVID. Unfortunately, it is not pre-COVID any longer. So I would like to hear a little bit about how you think the COVID pandemic is changing things and the particular challenges that you are now facing for us to learn as we're trying to put together a policy, because we, of course, have to do an after COVID policy.
So before you, Sheriff, before you answer that, go ahead. If anybody else, please, you have use the hands up feature that's available, and then I'll get to you for the next question. So go ahead, Sheriff.
Yeah, I'll just talk about the jails first of all, because I know that our inability to take in a lot of the people we were talking about pre-COVID is probably impacted Scott's job, and I'm anxious to hear his answer, but it's not something that we want to do. It's something we had to do. We've been very fortunate in managing our jail. We've had a total in our jail population, what I pointed out, started at 5,600. We've had a total of 28 positive cases, all but one we've identified at intake. We only have 2 positive in our jails now, and nobody's been hospitalized, and thank God we've had no deaths so far. So I think we're doing a good job, but to accomplish that, we had to downsize dramatically to create the isolation space, the quarantine space for our inmates. So before we had enough tests to test everybody intake, everybody went into 14-day quarantine, so that if they were going to be symptomatic or have that, they would hopefully do it in some type of a controlled environment in a isolation module. So say we've been successful, but that's eliminated San Diego Police Department's ability to book misdemeanors, which a lot of these illegal lodging, you know, all Scott knows better than I do what the charges that they bring these people in as a last resort, as he pointed out. And I want you, again, this is pre-COVID. It wasn't like we just put them in a cell and let them get sober. We spent a lot of money on mental health services and drug rehab in our facilities so that we can, get the people in some type of position to hand them back to the community. And the challenge is not just putting them out the door in downtown San Diego, it's having a sober living bed for them, having some place where they can continue to get the wraparound services that we provided in our jail, so they're not just back to where they started and back in our jail. I'm praying for a vaccine here in the next 6 months so we can get back, because I know it's gonna overall, I think, have an impact on our homeless issue. But I'll let Scott try to answer that.
So the sheriff is right. When COVID hit, it really disrupted everything about how law enforcement operates. But when you start getting into the special programs or efforts like dealing with homelessness, it really rattled our somewhat newly assembled system here. And by doing that, when I say that, I mean our homeless shelters were not COVID compliant. They were meant to stuff as many people as we could inside of those shelters. We had to basically halt bringing new intakes into the shelters. We really had to start, and quite frankly, we were panicked. We were afraid we were going to have to start letting people out of the shelters and back onto our streets. But what this caused us to do here in San Diego County was really to come together, and we ended up setting what I truly believe is probably the largest homeless shelter in the country, if not the world, down in our convention center. And with the current situation with COVID, there is no ability to have a convention. And so we had a massive space that was open, unused, with hundreds of employees being laid off. What we ended up doing was setting up a shelter inside there that has a capacity of almost 1,600. And the beginning of the month, we were at about 1350, 1340 people inside of that shelter. Very proud. I would say if I retired today, that would probably be one of the biggest things that I'm most proud of here in this county. We've got 3 different service providers. Everybody is fed 3 times a day. We sanitize the inside of that shelter 3 to 4 times a day, depending on the population that's in there, the head count. We've got county medical staff. If I was the operations chief for that facility, I had a county doctor assigned to me with a full team of nursing staff, 24 hours a day. We have medics assigned there, mental health clinicians, housing navigation unit. We brought everybody from the county into that facility to help get folks into housing from the shelter. And it's really been a very positive experience. Knock on wood, we're not out of the woods yet, but for the first 90 days that we were there, we were doing COVID testing. We've tested over 4,000. We've had over 4,000 tests with only 7 positives. That's about 1/4%. So it's phenomenal. Everybody predicted that it would be a disaster and we would have an outbreak of some kind. We've set up to be able to treat lice, scabies, other communicable diseases. We've got quarantine areas. As soon as somebody comes up out of their daily medical screenings that we do, if they come up with a temperature or any type of symptom, they're put immediately into quarantine and then moved out of the facility. We've made them wear face masks. All of these things that we do, we've made them do it before the CDC had laid out in their guidance of what were the safest protocols. And the reason we were able to do that is because we had a county doctor that was an expert on communicable diseases be able to give us the guidance that we needed. And so from this COVID experience, we've been able to turn it into a positive. But at the end of the day, even though my role was running the operation down there, it was not as a police officer. It was because of the management system we were using, I had an understanding of it. But what it meant for the law enforcement was that we now have a place for people to go. And we dumped everybody out of all of our shelters, put them into the convention center, and we've been continuing to grow ever since then.
And for anybody that turns up positive, the county went out and they reserved, I think it's 1,900 motel rooms in San Diego County. At any given time, I think the number that occupied were running around 300 to 400 individuals that have tested positive. They can now go into these isolation motel rooms. But I'm sure it's the same in Portland. There's not a lot of tourists here in San Diego right now. So you have a convention center. The hotels and motels were more than happy to rent rooms out to us. So anyway, that's kind of the city and the county coming together again on to deal with the COVID issue.
We're going to go to Tiffany next, but I do want to comment. I work with the homeless. I've been working with the homeless here since the 1990s, and our infection rate has been extremely low in that population. So it seems to be kind of maybe a common denominator compared to the general population. Okay, Tiffany, you have a question.
I want to say thank you. I always appreciate hearing about success stories in major cities on the West Coast, and that's what drew me to all that great work you're doing down in San Diego. Myself, I am a small business owner in Old Town Chinatown, downtown Portland, 15 years. So I'm wrapped around a social crisis or a humanitarian crisis as we speak. Sadly, Portland did not handle their COVID crisis effectively. They have not allocated any funding or resources or management to the people unsheltered on the street. And being a business in the heart of it all, I see this every day, and it's upon my hands to deal with this crisis. I see 200 tents on our streets in that small section of Old Town Chinatown. That doesn't include head count, that's tents. And we have a small sanctioned site that the city did give us that has 40 places available. And people are surrounded all around it. There's no CDC guidelines that are being followed. And the mayor said, quote, "I won't bullshit you. I am not able to allocate at this time any funds to this crisis." So many of us are watching this unfold. So It's very sad, but I'm also a crime victim from a serial crime offender in our community as well. The top 7 out of 100 list, my child and I as well. So I resonate with crime victims out there as well, especially for downtown Portland, where I've seen a downturn in the last few years for public safety, especially in this month alone. My question to you is, I met with Mayor Wheeler privately and I shook his hand and I said, hey, San Diego's doing some great things. I think we can relate to them because they are a major city like Portland on the West Coast. Have you met with San Diego to talk about all the great things they're doing down there? And I also saw, he said, well, I'm actually working with San Diego with their their social services, with their houseless population. And it made me think, wow, the Tenderloin is, Old Town Chinatown's a smaller version of the Tenderloin, but they actually, people of that community sued their city because their needs weren't being met during COVID crisis. And I wanted to ask you, has any of our major cities on the West Coast reached out to you, or have you been paying attention to what happens in San Francisco, the other major city next to you? And have you also been paying attention to what's happening in Portland? And can you shed us any insight into how to help us, or have you seen anybody in our city reach out to you? Thank you.
Well, I know in the city of San Diego, we've had close to 40 different cities and county, or city and county officials come tour what we're doing. We've had people from as far away as Canada. Vancouver was here to see how we're doing things here in the region. And I will say, and I don't mean to say this in a way to brag or boast at all, but just so you have a comparative understanding of the significance of what a 6% reduction is here in the state of California. In 2019, San Francisco had a 17% increase. Alameda County had a 43% increase. San Jose, 42%. Orange County, 43%. Kern County, 64%. Humboldt County had a 125% increase. County of San Diego had a 6% reduction. So those are some significant numbers. We chased it again with another 6% reduction this year. And we got out early this year to do our count right before COVID hit. Many of the other counties did not in the state of California. So unfortunately, this year's point in time counts may or may not be as consistent as they have in the past, if they even do them this year. So we're very fortunate we got ours in. Everybody predicted it was going to be an increase, yet we followed with another decrease. So it's worked. I do this stuff quite often. I know the sheriff does as well. We're open to explaining what we do here.
I'll bet there's not many major counties in the state of California that let local police departments book misdemeanors just because of jail crowding. It's interesting. Our relationship goes back pre-homeless issue. It has to do with dealing with the city of San Diego. When we put our biggest jail in downtown San Diego, and San Diego Police Department used to have jails, and they gave up their jails, and it was all negotiated. But as a condition of letting the county put their jail in downtown San Diego, there's an agreement that the city of San Diego can book, I think it's up to 150 or 200 misdemeanors at any given time in our jails. And that allows us to do this type of collaborative relationship when it comes to being the stick, if you will, along with a bunch of carrots before that, in trying to deal with this very difficult homeless population. So I bet a lot of other counties, I'm sure that you can't even book a misdemeanor, and they get a citation, they're released.
Even if it's book and release, it's not that we're trying to seek jail time or as the sheriff has spoke about previously, it is expensive to utilize the jails, but it's understanding that the threat of jail is out there if you're going to refuse all of the help and services that are available in the massive amounts, the tens of millions. I know the city is into $100+ million in one single year that we're spending on homelessness with all of our shelters and supportive services that are out there. By being able to enforce the misdemeanor offenses, it it forces a decision to be made on whether you're going to take the services or not. So that is the key to having the system work well.
So you have to understand, in California, back about 6 years ago, they passed a proposition, a ballot initiative that changed all your property crimes, most of your property crimes, shoplifting up to $950, all your drug use and drug possession offenses, all from felonies to misdemeanors. And which I don't have a problem. I get the philosophy behind that somebody shouldn't be labeled as a felon their entire life because they got caught with some coke on them or marijuana, or whatever the case was, or they shoplifted, $100 worth of information. The problem I have with that proposition, it's the whole carrot and the stick issue. If they just said, okay, after the third time or fifth time or 10th time you shoplift for $500, then it becomes a felony, then I could live with it. But you can do the same thing 3, 4, 10, 20 times and it's still a misdemeanor. I think that's going to catch up with us in California down the road. In fact, there's some propositions to kind of modify that, not to do away with it, but to add a stick into this, all the carrots that somebody has, along with the getting them into the system to get them the help they need, to get them out of that criminal behavior or that mental health or drug pattern they're in. So.
One quick thing that I often try to explain to people: law enforcement shouldn't be the frontline defense when it comes to homelessness. Certainly, there should be non-law enforcement related care and social work that's being done on the front lines. But law enforcement is an important bottom line. If you remove that law enforcement from that equation, all you're doing is lowering rock bottom for our homeless population. We draw that line of what is going to be tolerated and acceptable in any given society. If the drug use and the alcohol use and the unsanitary conditions are allowed to continue, then you're really the folks that are being hurt the most are your homeless folks living in that environment. But it also, as everybody has expressed today in this call, has a very negative impact on the quality of life of the folks that are living in that area, the folks that are traveling, and tourists that are coming to that area, but as well as your business owners that are trying to run a business in that area.
Yeah. How many of your friends in Portland? I've heard the same stories in Seattle, and we hear grumblings of that in downtown San Diego. So I can't take it anymore. I'm moving out. I can't. I won't grow up, and I won't work in that environment. And it's sad because these are some beautiful cities that are being impacted here.
Very good. Stan is next.
Yes. Again, thank you for being here. This is a fantastic conversation. I just wanted to hear a little bit more about the Sprung Bridge shelters. How were they funded? What was used, the land that they were located on? I'm wondering how big they are, how many there are. We have one Sprung structure, to my knowledge, here in Portland. It's called the River District Navigation Center, happens to be in my neighborhood. It was very well received and accepted by our neighborhood, as opposed to the NIMBY attitudes that we know will arise in many neighborhoods. However, here, without the private sector having been part of it and pretty much funding it, most of it, it never would have happened here. So I'm just wondering, how do you get those established in San Diego? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So we have used here in the city and really the county private funds from a foundation called the Lucky Duck Foundation, which Oregonians would be very familiar with. Patrick Kilkenny, or I think it was Kilkenny's last name, who was a former Oregon Duck athletic director years ago, started this foundation, and that's where the Lucky Duck Nexus comes in. But he is partnered with the owners of the Padres, some other business owners here in San Diego County. They do a tremendous amount of fundraising and have been able to fund a lot of the shelters that we have here in San Diego. They're about $1.5 million, I believe, to pay for them. We put them on city property. And then we also have a space at City Hall where we have several hundred beds in kind of a convention center room. So collectively, it's about 1,200 beds that I believe that we're able to provide out of these shelters. A total of 3 of them. One of them is actually being moved to a smaller city in the county in Chula Vista. That one holds about 175 people. Our largest sprung shelter holds about 330 folks inside of them. And they look like it's a kind of like a circus tent, but it's not. It's much more durable. Something that you see closer into maybe a hospital type setting. They're very thick material, full HVAC system. They're nice and comfortable inside.
Also, on piggybacking on that, the Lucky Duck Foundation contacted me a few months back. We, as you can imagine, going back to pre-COVID, 5,000 to 6,000 inmates in a given day. I prepare in my central processing facility, about 23,000 meals a day. So the Lucky Duck reached out to the richest lady in San Diego County, as a matter of fact, heir to the cargo fortune, and she's going to fund this. And I'm going to, because I have the ability to expand my food making capability, we started off with a pilot project where we're feeding 500 homeless people in the county, dealing with community-based organization. We take it to one place, they distribute it out to their various homeless individuals, at-risk population. And we're planning in the next year to expand that to probably close to 4,000 people. That's 2 meals a day for 4,000 people. And we can do it cheaper than anybody else. We're not putting anybody else out of business, but it allows this philanthropist to have her money go a long way and go to addressing a critical need in our community.
Thank you. So we're going to go to Candy Wilson. And Candy, if you could go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. My name's Candy Wilson. I live here in Old Town as well, and I have a front row view of the mental illness and the homelessness that is abundant in my neighborhood. Question: I'm guessing that not all of your homeless are housed yet, whether it be in a shelter or wherever, that you still have an unhoused population. And our mayor, in his infinite wisdom, is concentrating all his efforts on housing, be it affordable housing, supportive housing, but he thinks he can build his way out of this situation, and we don't think we can. And so we have been advocating for sanctioned camps. And I was wondering if San Diego has ever dealt with this type of alternate shelter, call it safe sleeping places, because we have a habit of sweeping or cleaning up tent campers on the city streets. That only serves to move them to a different block, to a different, area. It does nothing to alleviate the problems that we have on the streets, the sanitation problems, the crime problems, goes on and on. So that was my question. Have you had any experience with sanctioned camps?
Yes. So right after the hepatitis A outbreak, the first thing we did set up was really a small tent city. I think it was about 250 people that we put on a city lot. and it worked well. Having a variety of different types of places is a positive thing, because some folks like to have their own private little space in a tent. Others like being in the sprung shelters, where it's more of a camp type setting with bunks and in that type of environment, there's a lot of social interaction. And some folks do much better, quite frankly, in that environment. Others might use the hotel type system, where for even particularly like families, that works really well. So there's a little bit more privacy and safety and security in that setup. So having that kind of mixed variety, I think, is important. In the city, we have, from this last point in time count from this year, 4,487 total homeless, documented homeless individuals. Of that, 2,283 are unsheltered. So 2,283 are still out on the streets night overnight, but 2,600 are in our shelter systems or in some other type of care facility.
And I think the mayor here and a lot of the different cities in the county are taking a multi-pronged approach. They're trying to do what your mayor's did, to build affordable housing also, and to remove regulations to allow a lot of what they call infill in regulations that you can build in the granny flat behind your house to try to get more affordable housing. So they're working on that angle also. Another thing that as far as finding places for people to live, they're opening up parking lots for people that are living in their cars. They've opened up different parking lots around the county to allow these people a safe place to go in at night and live. And I don't think there's one size fits all. I think you got to try all these different angles. But I couldn't agree with your comment more when you start up. We're not going to build our way out of this. It's going to take a long time. And San Diego's probably got the third highest housing costs in the country, third or fourth. So it's going to take a while, but you should also try that. But I think you got to look at everything: shelters, parking lots, you name it.
One thing that I always tell people when I speak publicly, so of the 2,283 that we currently have unsheltered on our streets, if we could build a studio or one bedroom apartment for all of them today, theoretically everybody is off of the streets in the city. What would we do if 1,000 people out of the 30 to 40,000 homeless folks up in LA and Orange County, what happens if 1,000 of those folks say, hey, I want one of those places, and they move to San Diego? Are we going to build another 1,000? To what end? And so if you can't answer that question, then you probably should be looking at, can you build your way out of it, or is there something else you should be doing that helps really get folks directed into a system that helps them progress up the ladder step by step.
Excellent. Stan, I don't know how much time or we have. We don't have any more first-time questions. I think Luke has got a follow-up or something, but I don't know.
Why don't we take one or two more questions or comments, and then I think we need to wrap it up.
Okay. So I think Luke, was that a second hand raise for you? Okay, go ahead.
So I really like the fact that you guys are talking about that balance with compassion, but with accountability, and the fact that you are, we did follow exactly what you did. We decriminalized a whole bunch of stuff and turned them into misdemeanors, but up here in Portland, nobody's really accountable or arrested for a misdemeanor. You guys are really different in all of California too. Do you have, I mean, obviously it seems to me that hepatitis was it was a cloud, but it was a silver lining in that it forced change. We don't have the hepatitis. We don't have anything necessarily forcing us to make these necessary changes where we have a compassion with accountability. But do you have any recommendations on, hardcore cities throughout California? I'm sure LA right above you, San Francisco, they probably look at you guys. Any recommendation to other cities in California or the West Coast where we don't have the accountability component? That's my question.
Well, you don't want to have 20 people die because of a lack of action, a lack of leadership. Certainly having your elected officials be on the same page and be supportive is critical. And I don't know how you generate the need for or at least the threat that could happen to you. But you certainly don't want to have something like that happen because of a lack of leadership.
And I think a lot of that spirit that I talked about when we first started with the collaboration and cooperation that's always existed between law enforcement, I think that kind of spread to our other elected officials. When we started off with the hepatitis A pandemic, or the deaths, I have to say there was some finger pointing between the city and the county, and I think wiser people took a step back, said we got to knock this off, and it's really been a good collaboration. Not to say that everybody's worried about their egos and getting reelected and all that stuff, but I see that it really is at a minimum here in San Diego, especially since the Hep A outbreak. It's tragic that it takes something like that to really bring people together, but it's working. It really is. And the biggest obstacle I see now, because I think people at least are in an agreement on what we need to do in a path forward, it's the NIMBYs, because we got 4,400 square miles in this county. It's spread out. We got San Diego, the big bear in the woods, but there's some other good-sized cities, and then a big hunk of unincorporated, and there's got to be a mindset that we're in this together, and we've got to address it. We're kind of in a cul-de-sac down here. Thank God for Camp Pendleton and the Mexican border and the desert, because if you drive up the coast once you get past Camp Pendleton, you can't tell if you're in Orange County, LA County, all the way up to San Luis. It's all solid, but we're in a cul-de-sac, and I think that instills we're in this together attitude, and let's solve this down here. There's no magic. I mean, still, we got a long way to go. There's no silver bullet here, but I think we're heading the right direction. I don't know how you do that in Portland or San Francisco.
Well, again, so Steve, is there anyone else? If there's one last comment or question?
No, there's not, but I'd like to go ahead and chime in real quick. As a person who has worked, for 37 years with the homeless population, I've had everything from kids 14 years old to working with people who trying to leave the cartel live in my house in their recovery. And usually that happens because they hit bottom and they found that there's a better way. And that's what I love about you guys, and what I don't get about our system here in Portland. They don't believe in allowing people to hit bottom, and which to me has always been, if you're in the recovery business, you know that it takes two things: when they know enough or they hurt enough. And those are just balancing things. For some people it has to be hurt. For some people it's like, oh well, hey, this works way better than that. But I love your system there. I've been advocating for that here. So it's really good for us to find folks like you who we can point to and say, look at their numbers, look at the data, look what's happening there, because everybody here, always wants to do the, hey, we want to see the data and so forth. And so you guys are providing that today. And this has been really, really valuable for us who are trying to improve our city. Those of us like Luke and others who work with the homeless, we've spent our lives serving them, and know that to let them die on the streets is the most discompassionate thing we can do. And yet that's the bet, because they said, no, if you put them in a housing, well, I know people who actually get put in housing and then commit suicide because of the total isolation that they go through. Like this myopic thing of housing first. I mean, yes, let's have housing. That's good. We need it, but we need a process to get them to the place where they can actually be sustainable in housing. And and you guys is, the way you've done things there is a real shining light for us to point to. So thank you so much. And that's my comments there.
So Bill and Scott, I cannot thank you enough There are many lessons for us to learn here. I think most of us in this Zoom meeting get it. Our challenge is to get our political leaders to get it. And that's something that's part of what we're about. And you're absolutely a model for how things can be made better with creative thinking, innovation, and just the will and commitment to really get good things done. So with that, again, we thank you so much. And I think that we will, yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, we will adjourn. And thank you all for joining this meeting.
Stan, tell Ray I didn't embarrass him, okay?
He embarrasses himself. So
Okay. Thanks, Stan.
thank you, everyone. See you all.
Best
Be
of luck.
well.